All right, everybody. I want to welcome you to another edition of SIBA's Reader Meet Writer. My name is Wiley Cash. I'm the 2019 recipient of the Pat Conroy Legacy Prize from SIBA, and I am the writer in residence at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. SIBA stands for the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance, and this is an organization that represents just under 700 independently owned bookstores throughout the South. So perhaps you are here tonight because one of those bookstores advertised this event or posted it on Facebook or somewhere else on social media. So if that is the case, please consider purchasing Josephine's book from the bookstore that brought you instead of that obscure online bookstore named for a river somewhere. Support the local independent bookstores in your community because they support authors like Josephine and me. And normally authors like Josephine would be in the bookstore in your community. But of course, the coronavirus pandemic makes that impossible. There's some light at the end of the tunnel, perhaps. Give us the end of the summer, maybe the beginning of the fall. Maybe we'll be in person, but right now we're not. So what we've done is we're bringing you Reader Meet Writer. We've been doing these since July, and we have received incredible support from so many great independent bookstores throughout the South and so many readers. So please continue supporting us and join us next week. When we are Tuesday, May 11th at 7 p.m., we will have Laura Dave with her novel, The Last Thing He Told Me, which is a selection of Reese Witherspoon's book club, if I'm not mistaken. So that will be a very exciting event. So Tuesday, May 11th at 7 p.m. for Laura Dave. And then 2 nights later, Thursday, May 13th at 7 p.m., we'll be joined by Tom Clavin to discuss his new book, Blood and Treasure, Daniel Boone and the Fight for America's First Frontier. But tonight, we're very excited. I'm really excited that we are joined by Josephine Caminos Oría. And if you have any questions for Josephine during tonight's conversation, go to the chat, the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and type your question in right there. Don't wait until the end of the show. Just type it in during the show. You're not going to disturb us. And this way you won't forget your question. When you ask your question, make sure to mention your name and the name of your home independent bookstore. And I will ask Josephine your question, give your bookstore a shout out at the end of the show. So without further ado, I want to introduce tonight's guest. Josephine Caminos Oría is an Argentine-American cookbook author, entrepreneur, and mom. It was in her early 40s with 5 young children in tow that she took a chance on herself, leaving a C-level career to make dulce de leche. Today, Josephine, along with her Argentine husband, Gaston, is the founder of La Dorita Cooks, an all-natural line of dulce de leche products and Pittsburgh's first resource-based kitchen incubator for startup and early-stage food makers. In addition, Josephine is the author of Dulce de Leche Recipes, Stories, and Sweet Traditions, and her new book has just come out. It is called Sobre Mesa, and I am so excited that she is with us tonight. Josephine, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I really appreciate it, Wiley.
So I was telling you in our green room, in our virtual green room, we were, having all the backstage, food cart beverages and liquors before the show. I was telling you how I feel like this is the perfect book for now because, I want to talk about what Sobre Mesa means. And if you could tell us what that means in terms of the Argentinian tradition. But I feel like this is such a great book for now where we are so desperate to come together. We are so desperate to be around family and friends who interest us, and maybe even people who make our blood boil. We just want to be around people and have a shared culinary experience and a good evening. We're longing for that moment. And I'm wondering when the moment arrived for you that this book is a conglomeration of so many different things. When was the moment for you as the author of this book and as a cook? When was the moment for you where this book just kind of came together as a project that went from an idea to something that felt actionable? What was going on in your life where it just kind of came together?
Yeah, well, I should first of all say that this was a 3-year project. So The idea came to me probably a year after my cookbook had hit the market, had been published. And my cookbook they call it cookbook as food memoir because it has like little snippets of my grandmother, my abuela Dorita, my story, why I suddenly jumped ship and went from a healthcare job to make dulce de leche. But every recipe has like a little snippet. And my publisher would be like, you can't write so much. It's really about the food. But really, I wanted to write the stories. So then they put this section in called The Wisdom of La Dorita, of Dorita, my grandma. And I was like, okay, good. But that book published, and I felt unsatiated. I mean, I love the book. I love it. But I felt like I had a story to tell. I didn't know what, though. I didn't know what was eating at me. Probably a year later, I was walking in Charleston, and it was I was with my brother, who's Oscar in the book. I changed my family's names, but I spent a lot of my summers with him. They're really nice. They let me stay. Their guest bedroom is called Josie's room. So anyway, I was walking with him and my husband, and all of a sudden this idea came to me. And, sometimes I put my beats on and they walk and talk about something and I just listen to my music. And this idea of sobremesa came to me, and I didn't really know why, Wiley, but I turned around and I said to my husband, I said, Gaston, I'm going to write a book about sobremesa. And I think he like nudged my brother and was like, here we go again. But so it came to me, and it probably took me 6 months to process it, but it wouldn't leave me alone. And then I started, I just kind of didn't know where it was taking me, but something told me the world's going to need this, and I do these like writing exercises where I'm kind of spiritual, where I'll like say, why is this coming to me? Is this a message? Is this a sign? And one of the messages I got was the world will need this. And so it's really timely when it's coming out, Wiley,
Well, I want to ask you what sobremesa means in terms of your cultural tradition and a culinary tradition. But I also want to go back to the moment where your husband rolls his eyes and looks at your brother-in-law or your brother. Is this, you have so much going on with all these different parts, not to mention the two of you have a family, but you have so many. Are you always attuned to these moments? And what is the dynamic in your relationship where you come with these ideas? Is your husband always like, I don't know? Or is he like, does he come to you with crazy ideas? Because I have crazy ideas and my wife's like, today I can't hear a crazy idea today. Yeah. What is your dynamic like?
It's usually me. And it's usually him doing deep breathing and saying some really just inappropriate joke. A la Argentine style, but I will say that he is like the most supportive person in the world too, but he thinks I'm crazy half the time,
Well, can you tell us what the title of the book, Sobremesa, can you tell us what that means in your cultural tradition?
Sure. So first of all, sobremesa is very Argentine, but it's also very Latin, very Hispanic. Los españoles, the Italians, it's that time that you spend after the food is done, rumpled napkins hit the table, you've got sweet and low packets, someone's definitely uncorking another bottle of wine, hopefully, or if not like a limoncello or something, and you sit and you stay. That's like when you buckle in. So when my father-in-law would come to the United States, they would be so offended when we would finish in a restaurant and the waiters would come and say, would you like anything else or just a check? Because in Argentina, until you flag that waiter, the table's yours. So, and it's really just, by the way, in Brazil, it means dessert. So it has the same concept. And the literal translation is on top of the table, sobre mesa. But really it's gathering around, and staying. And it's just that moment, Wiley, when like you're full, you're just kind of relaxed, maybe you've had a drink, maybe you haven't, but still food it's kind of a portal. It breaks down walls and it takes us somewhere else, it's memories, but things come up, emotions. And that's when the real magic happens. The real talk.
Well, speaking of magic, one term that I've heard you use, and I know this is a thematic element of the book, is culinary time travel. And can you talk about what culinary time travel means for you, given your background, your family, even your move from Pittsburgh to Mount Pleasant? Can you talk about culinary time travel for you as a person, but also how you use it in the book?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of what you might hear too is I describe the book as culinary time travel. So it's two things to me. First of all, I just really wanted to highlight Argentina. You don't see a lot about Argentina when, in the United States, they talk about Latinx. So, I really wanted to just put a real light on what it is. So I call that armchair travel through, for anyone who'd like to travel to Argentina from their armchair and taste their way through the country. My recipes aren't only Argentine, but there's a lot of, kitchen folklore in there that you only find out if you're cooking with your grandma or watching someone make something, but culinary time travel to me is really, it's something that has fascinated me since I read Proust in college. And, the Madeleine, when you take that one bite and all of a sudden you're somewhere else or someone's with you, so for me, culinary time travel really is that food is so much more than food. It's the essence of a person. It's the essence of a moment. It's the essence of a memory in the making. So like me and you could walk down to downtown Charleston and try a hot dog. And if we both connect over that hot dog, every time I eat that hot dog, I'm probably going to think about you.
Yeah.
It transports you. So for me, that's the real culinary time travel. And I apologize for my beeps. I did the do not disturb.
That was actually the time travel queuing up to go get that hot dog. Because right when you said that, I was like, I can eat a hot dog right now.
Yeah.
So that was the portal opening.
Yeah.
You have so many people in this book, so many characters, so many memories. Is there anything, whenever I think about writing, and I teach writing to undergraduates primarily, and I always tell my students, when you're writing a scene between two characters interacting or somebody's having a memory, what is the hot thing in you as a person that is generating the heat on the page? Because if we don't bring heat from our lives to the page is cold, right? We can't falsely create heat on the page unless we bring it. What were the moments in your life that felt hot and urgent and relevant that you found yourself kind of repairing to every time you sat down to write this book, to write the story parts of the book?
Well, there was a big loss in my life that changed my personality. There is the me before and the me after the loss. And I think that happens with almost everyone. Once you lose a very poignant person in your life, you're never the same. And, you change something for the good, something, it's just that you continue to evolve. And so I was already sort of having doubts about my path. It didn't feel like I was on the right path. I had a great job. I probably was a 15-year into my career as a CFO of a medical company. But Wiley, for years, I had only been the only woman at the table. I had reached my ceiling and it was only men above me, and there wasn't that possibility. When they talked about partnership, that was never me, even though I was second in command. So I knew that it was up to me to rewrite my story. I also knew there was a lot of women like me and I could have applied to a large hospital system but I was very jealous of something, and it was my time. And I wanted to manage my own time, especially because I had 5 kids, and I am always willing to work. And on really odd times, my first cookbook I wrote in the middle of the night, and this one I did a lot too. 3 a.m. in the morning, I wake up sleeping and I have inspiration. It's almost like maybe I'm just relaxed and my brain starts, kind of rewinding, and I know. But so that sort of happened. And then, I started this company making dulce de leche, and I really thought that was my path. But then Interestingly, I met someone once, and she is sort of like an intuitive, but I'm very Catholic, but I had a conversation with her. Sometimes people will come into your life for a reason and they'll bring you a message. And she gave me this yellow note, Wiley, and she said, "You're going to need this number." And I said, "Well, what is this?" And she said, "It's an editor." And I go, "Oh, I don't write. I'm a CFO. I do numbers. I do spreadsheets. I do Excel sheets. I hate it." Like, I was like, I'm really good at it, but And she looks at me and she like closed my hand around it and she goes, "Not yet." 2 years later, I wrote my first cookbook. Yeah. And I forgot about it, and then when I decided to write my cookbook, which again, we were on vacation and I told my husband I was going to write a cookbook. And I've learned to not tell too many people things because they'll look at you and they'll go, "What do you mean you're going to write a cookbook? Are you a chef? Are you a writer? Don't you have a career?" So, you want to keep certain things to yourself until you really know. But so I've just been on this path, and it's definitely a culinary path. There's a lot of emotion tied to it. And it's really a lot of me discovering who I am. But I hope I answered your question.
You did, and I'm fascinated. I'm sure folks are watching this like, when are they going to get to the food? And we will get to the food. And I want to remind everybody, if you have questions, go down to the Q&A button and type your question in there. But Josephine, I want to go back to what you said about you wake up in the morning and you still kind of have one foot in that dream state where your book is alive in your mind and your rational mind is not swatting down ideas and telling you like, that's a bad one. That's a bad one.
Right.
And do you ever get into that space in the kitchen where you're like, I'm just going to try something crazy? And I'm in this space where I'm not going to swat down possibilities.
Yeah. So if you read my first cookbook, the intro, I talk a lot about Sunday baking therapy. So one of the things I did, other than drinking copious amounts of wine when I had that tremendous loss, was I would go to so I used to be very rigid about having to go to church, getting my 5 kids to church. My husband's like another child. He'd be like, "I'll drive you and pick you up because I have to run to the market." There was always something. It was me in church with the 5 kids, and I'd be like, "This is not relaxing." But
I can't hear God, honey. You're clicking tomatoes.
I started thinking, why do I have to subject myself to these rules? And I am bringing my children up with faith, and so I started doing this Sunday baking therapy ritual. When I would get home from church, sometimes, or I'll just not go. And I would literally like send the kids outside to play or send them downstairs and be like, "Get on your Xboxes, get all your screens out, don't bother me." And I would just put on an apron and usually be in my PJs. And I would bake. And that's when I get like a lot of clarity in things. Sometimes I'd cry, sometimes I'd laugh, you might think I'm crazy. I have this like journal where I'd write crazy things, or sometimes it's just like a meditation, like kind of like my book. My book's kind of like a gastronomic meditation. It's a lot of conversation, but when you get alone in that kitchen, and sometimes I could really hear like my abuela Dorita, I could hear her saying stuff, so. And maybe it's just memories of things she said. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think anything done purely and innocently becomes a holy act. When I teach creative writing workshops, I tell my students, I was raised Southern Baptist, which means I can't dance.
Right.
But it also means that I'm used to going to church and talking about like the mystery of faith. Like, what does it mean? How do we practice it? Why do we believe what we believe? And that's what we also do with writing. What is the mystery? How do stories work? Why do characters come alive? How does this work? In the kitchen, why am I having this memory when I smell this particular spice or vanilla or whatever the case may be? Right. It's all magic. It's all mystery. And what is faith if not magic and mystery and trying to make sense of all of it?
Yeah, of course.
But speaking of food, you structurally this book, you match particular recipes with certain stories or parts of your life. Can you share how you decided where to place recipes alongside stories and maybe share some of the dishes you talk about in the book?
Sure. Well, just like Sobremesa came to me, the food wrote the stories for me. So I did a lot of cooking when I wrote this, but for instance, the prologue starts with sopa pastina. And there is pastine soup, and I think it's Italian, the pastine name. I'm not sure, but there is I was in a terrible car accident when I was 16, and it was my fault, kind of. And I almost, I could have really killed my grandfather and my brother. And it was just a devastating thing for me. It was incredible that we lived. And it opened up sort of my spirituality, but I went through the windshield. So I had to have my eyes bandaged. And I spent 3 days or 4 days in my parents' bedroom in the dark, just like staring, and I couldn't talk. And I think I couldn't process it, maybe I was a little bit in shock, and I was okay. It was just my brother got out with a broken arm, my grandpa with a neck brace. But so my grandmother, I heard her come up the stairs, and you can tell people's steps, so I could hear, and then I could smell the soup she was bringing me. And we were in Miami in this large stone house we had, so a large staircase, and I could just smell it. It was almost like it was bringing me back to life. And I remember her feeding it to me, and I couldn't see, but I could just, every sense was just like bringing me back to life. And, I think I finally started crying. I started talking to her, how scared I was, how it was my fault. And I was young. I was 16, at the time I thought I was old, but like, you can't, So that story wrote itself. The soup wrote that story, and then I would say it's really about emotional eating, the good and the bad.
Emotional cooking, emotional eating.
So one of my favorite recipes in the book is really simple. It's a mushroom sandwich. And that is the sandwich that my mom used to celebrate me, to pick me up, and so that was, I placed that in a moment where I'm having like a real heartbreak moment. I'm 23. I'm kind of, don't have much direction. I was maybe 22, direction in my life. I thought I was getting married to someone I'd been with since I was 15, So that mushroom sandwich, that's my mom's love letter. And, it's such a simple recipe.
Well, can you tell us about the soup and the mushroom sandwich? Like what are the composite ingredients, and what is the?
Sure. So the sopa pastina is, it's just broth. It's almost like, I guess, a bone broth, but boiled for hours and hours. And my grandmother would then take all of the vegetables and she would process them and put them back. So it's real velvety, sometimes she would, and then she'd put egg and whip it in. And then these pastime noodles, and she made it with laurel leaves, and oh my God, it's just like all of these layers of just deliciousness. And then my mom's mushroom sandwich, you had to have Town Talk bread, which I'm from Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was Town Talk town. Now, do you know who bought Town Talk bread? Is Wonder Bread, but it's not the same. So, there are times when only white sandwich bread will do.
Yeah.
And white button mushrooms, you can't use canned. I love mushrooms. Like if you make me anything with mushrooms, I'm going to eat it. But it has to be just the plain white button. You could try baby portobello. It's delicious, but and you just cook it real high on heat with butter and garlic, and they sear up real quick. And then you just, this much mushrooms to the sandwich, and then you have to eat it alone, preferably in your pajamas, maybe watching a Hallmark movie. You do not share, and you have to eat it really quick, because by the time you're done, the mushroom butter juice has like disintegrated your bread.
Especially Wonder Bread. That's why it's so. That's the wonder of Wonder Bread. Where does it go when it disintegrates?
It's stick into your mouth, and you're just like, oh my God, do I go make myself another? So but that's a sandwich that it's like a big hug.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing about food though is when you try to recreate a moment, oftentimes it leads to heartache, because it's really hard to recreate those moments, especially if someone makes it to you for a certain way. It'll never be this. Sometimes you just have to accept it will never be the same, but you still enjoy it. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask what you said about let me open this back up. What you said about Wonder Bread buying Talk of the Town. That feels like a particularly American Town Talk. Talk of the town, town talk. The fact that Wonder Bread and you're very familiar with Pittsburgh. I'm relatively familiar with
Oh,
Pittsburgh.
yeah.
Pittsburgh is a city that is so fiercely proud of itself, its traditions, its neighborhoods, its culinary expressions. To have Wonder Bread buy up the local bread feels like a particularly heartbreaking American story.
I think it was just the factory. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the foreign corporation buying the factory and going from making steel to making, transistor, whatever computer parts. And so you're so grounded in Pittsburgh, but you're, spiritually calling back to Argentina. You're merging these two cultures. And can you talk about the role of ancestors, your own life, your contemporary surroundings in Pittsburgh and now outside of Charleston, but the merging together of all these seemingly disparate parts of your life into one culinary tradition that is your family now?
Right. Well, I should say, by the way, I only selected kind of American recipes, but we have empanadas, milanesas, so there's a lot of Argentine in there. But when I was growing up, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I am a true Pittsburgh girl. Yinzer, burger, that's it. But I grew up in a household where when I would come home, throw my backpack down, everyone, my parents spoke Spanish. We spoke a lot of English, but they would force us to speak Spanish. But when my abuelos were in town, Dorita and Alfredo, sometimes for 6 months, sometimes for a year, we spoke Spanish, so I was raised in an Argentine household. We embraced a lot of American things too, but there's two types of immigrants. There's those that come over and say, you know what? Forget the language. We're not going to teach it to you all because we want you to really assimilate. And then there's the ones that are like my parents who came over late. They were probably 29, 32, so they spoke, and that's, they to this day speak in very heavy accents, and Spanish is just it's their norm. It's their,
Mm-hmm.
So we grew up very much between the two cultures. That's why a lot of the book has a theme. We grew up between the Pampas and the prairie, between the Argentine Pampas. So I always felt so warm, and like with my grandmother, like I felt very Argentine with her. She'd teach us all these rhymes, she'd try to get me to roll my double R's, and like I could not roll them to save the life. She'd be like, R con, she'd be teaching me these tongue twisters. I'm not going to do it, but, and I always kind of felt like an imposter, so people would come to our house and we'd be speaking in Spanish. Now, my parents weren't rude. Like if I had an American friend, but they would hear the Spanish, And so we were always kind of like the Argentine family. But then when I went to Argentina, I was definitely La Yankee. I was the Yankee. And like, so you're kind of like, wait, what am I then? So you're in between. So I always kind of felt like an imposter when I was in Argentina, even though with just my grandmother, I felt, totally myself. And not always, it wasn't, but I just didn't really reconcile it until, I had this tremendous heartbreak, and I ended up going back when I was about 23. And there was a journey there to coming into this space between the two cultures and really reconciling what I like to call my dual and sometimes dueling personalities. They sometimes clash, American ideology, and I hate to say American because Argentina's in America, we all are, but North American, United States ideology is very different in the culture from Argentine. So a lot of times I'd go and I'd be like, oh my God, this is like a different world, but it was. But my world in Pittsburgh was also different, if that makes any sense. So,
yes, absolutely. And do you feel like the culinary traditions and your ability to merge those traditions was the key to you maybe reconciling those?
Yes. So even as a young girl, my grandmother would, she was so everything. She was very cosmopolitan, but she loved to cook. So, in the morning she'd throw on her aprons and she'd always make everything homemade, gnocchi, milanesas, anything and everything, dulce de leche sometimes. But we would sit in the kitchen, and by like osmosis, we got this culture, and so that stayed with me. That's when she would tell me stuff about Argentina from the faraway lands, someday you'll come back. And then when I did go back, when I was 23, I lived with her for 4 or 5 months.
Mm.
and we would cook together. And she was older, you know, she was about 80 at that time. And I got to tell you, just, I got so much culture and I got so much identity. You know, I figured I would sit there in the kitchen and I'd be doing a lot of the stuff because she had Parkinson's and, you know, and I like filled me up. It's nourishment, you know. The culinary is definitely there. And a lot of it is her. I mean, she really, my mother was a great cook, but it was my grandmother, you know.
Yeah.
My mom lived at a different pace of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The story you're telling, my wife's grandparents are Italian American, first generation born in the United States, and my wife's grandmother is still alive. She's, you know, relatively young in her late 70s. I hope she's not watching this when I'm revealing her age. But those culinary traditions are so important. And
Yeah.
talking to you now, I'm feeling the weight of the duty to make sure that my daughters and myself, really, because I've married into this family, embrace those traditions as well. Because if we don't
Yeah.
embrace them, what happens to them?
It's hard. Like I have teenagers and I can't tell you how often I just want to be like, okay, get up when they ask to be excused. You know, we do make sure that they ask to be excused. And we don't have dinner together every night because they play soccer, they play tennis, but probably 5 nights a week, you know, especially weekends. And oftentimes I just want to tell them, okay, go ahead. And I just want to sit with my husband and have a glass of wine and not be bothered. But you know, it's good to sit there. Tell you a story. So I was brought up with soda mesa, obviously, but not like they do in Argentina. You know, I mean, sometimes it's for like 2 hours and then you're actually going into like a picada and another meal, you know, and you're like, wait, I didn't get up yet. But I had an issue, not an issue. We had right after 2000, September 11, 2000, we went to Argentina probably 6 months later, and tensions were very high in the world, you know, and a lot of, so I was sitting at this huge table at my in-laws' house. There were probably 30 people. And I'm not going to talk about political affiliations, but, you know, they started kind of, my father-in-law started talking about, well, but the United States and their policies, maybe it was, I love him to death. So it was not that he was saying we were asking for it, but he was saying that it's because of our, you know, and I got up from that table. I had kids. I left them all with my husband.
Yeah.
I was like, oh no, I didn't have kids. This is right when we married. Sorry. And I was like, oh no, I am not, because it's hard. Like I am American and I get offended, you know, but I'm also Argentine. So do not talk badly about Argentina.
Sure, yeah.
You can only talk badly about Argentina if you're actually Argentine. And then the same with America.
Sure, yeah.
So I got up and oh my God, I was so offended. And I think I just went to sleep. I probably had too much Malbec or something. And by the way, they eat dinner there at like 10. So it was probably 12:30 at night at this point. So anyway, the next morning I get up and I'm having my mate and my father-in-law comes in and talks to me and he goes, so Gaston told me you got offended. And I was like, well, you know, whatever. Like you have to realize like we live in the United States and you're totally criticizing. And I really upset. And I told him, you know, too many people lost their lives and you just can't, you know, point fingers. And he said to me, yeah, but in Argentina, we stay at the table and we talk about it. And then we kiss and make up. So you're bad for getting up because you should have told me that, you know, and not had your husband tell me, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, it's true.
That is some family real talk right there.
That's why in the green room, we were talking about how sometimes it takes grit and grace to stay at that table.
It does, yeah. Well, we have some questions coming in and I want to remind folks, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A there at the bottom of the screen. Donna Joe, DJ Miles at Novel Bookstore in Memphis, Tennessee says, somehow I never considered or heard the term before, culinary time travel. It is new to me and I just wanted to know if this is how you believe we can learn more about the cultures of the world. As simple as foods from New Orleans to Memphis, and then there is more global, such as Argentina and Brazil or Italian and Mediterranean. So much to learn and to learn with food. I love this.
Oh, I love that question. And yeah, I definitely think it's a way you can learn about culture. You know, one of the things my husband and I do anytime we go to a new town, we don't travel really outside of the country much except to Argentina, but we go to the local markets. We go to the butcher shops. We go, you know, we like to go to farmers markets, but we like to go to supermarkets. It tells you so much about a country, about a culture, even more so. And we also really like to look at the street food. just kind of it gives you the personality of a place. And, it's the same if you're trying to get to know a boyfriend or a new friend or your in-laws. The food they eat, it says a lot, the way they eat, it's just, I think it's, like I said, I think it's an invitation. It's our calling card. Our food is our identity. And believe me, like the huge piece of carrot cake I ate for breakfast today, I do not want that to be my identity. So, but the overall.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm sure you probably spent plenty of time at the Strip District on the end of Pittsburgh. I mean, that was such, I'd never lived anywhere like that before, where there's
so many Italian. Yeah. I mean, just, it's so good. The butcher shops. Yeah. The fish stores I really miss that.
Mm-hmm.
I miss that. I'm in a food town right now, but I haven't found that yet,
Sure.
and,
Pittsburgh's a wonderful food town too.
It just needs to move like down south.
Needs to be warmer.
It just needs to have more sun.
Yeah, I can see that. We have Helen from Copperfish Books in Punta Gorda, Florida, said, today is my son, the chef's birthday, and he and my 2 daughters did Sunday baking sessions after church all of the time. And yes, we even took orders. So I knew I needed to get your book to send him for a belated birthday present, as your stories are so similar to mine. And I think that goes back to what Donna Jo was saying. We hear these stories and we're like, maybe a different cultural background, a different culinary experience, but these things really do bring us together.
It connects us. Food is a way to belong. We all want to belong, and if I can quickly just tell one story, when I told my mother-in-law, Graciela, and Argentines are known for their candor. It's you really have to get a thick skin, but once you have it, it's freeing. It is freeing.
Mm-hmm.
But I told her about 2 years ago, I have this new project. I'm writing a memoir. And she said, why would someone want to write? What are you going to write about? Why would someone want to read you? I love you, but who are you that somebody would actually want to read your story? And I think she also kind of thought I was crazy, but it was the best thing anyone could ever say to me. And back to that this is her story and her son's story, is that while the book is about me, I almost want it to not be about me. I want it to be, because I feel like it's your story. Maybe you have your abuela Dorita. Maybe you have these cooking, cooking traditions. I was really torn in my mid 30s when I was wanting to start another company, and I did. I still worked my other job for 7 years after that, but I can't tell you how many people came and told me it's selfish, about my kids leaving a job. What would I do to their lifestyle? And so maybe there's a woman out there who drank that same Kool-Aid that said she can't follow her dreams. I just think it's a universal story, and food is universal. It connects us.
Yeah. Well, my brother is a stand-up comedian, and he's got this really long joke that it should be made a law that we have to pronounce all of the ethnic foods that we eat in the United States with the correct accent, because it's hard to be a racist if you're pronouncing food correctly, in front of your friends. And so even something like that, these culinary pathways do open up political conversations, cultural conversations, in ways that are rewarding and long lasting, and maybe most importantly, effective.
Yeah.
So, well, this was so fun, Josephine. Thank you for spending time with us tonight. And thank you for everybody who joined us. Sober Mesa is out. It just came out. Was it May 4th? It just came out?
May 4th, just last Tuesday.
Yeah. So please get a copy of the book. Look at the recipes, read the stories. This book reads like a novel. It's rare to find a food memoir that reads quite that way. But please join us next Tuesday. We are going to have a big event with Laura Day, The Last Thing He Told Me, Tuesday, May 11th at 7 p.m. And we will see you then on the next edition of SIBA's Reader Meet Writer. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye, Josephine.
Bye-bye.